The day Charlotte Abbott bought a ranch for $1. The wind carried the kind of promise only fools believe in. It clawed at her hat, whispered through the dry grass, and pushed against her like it wanted her to turn back. She didn't. She'd traded too much silence to stop now. By the time she reached the sagging gate marked Willow Creek Ranch, the sun was a coin sinking into rust. She thought she was buying land. What she didn't know was that something on it had been waiting for her. Charlotte pushed the gate open, and it groaned like something half asleep but unwilling to wake. The hinges complained, the dust sighed, and the air smelled of rust, grass, and the faint bitterness of old rain. She led Silver through, her mare's hooves thudding against the dry earth like a heartbeat that hadn't decided if it should quicken or stop. The ranch unfolded slow, piece by piece. Fences collapsed into weeds, a barn leaning as though it had been listening to too many storms, and a house that slouched beneath the weight of its own roof. It wasn't beauty that held her gaze. It was possibility. People back east would have called it ruin, but Charlotte had learned that ruin was just another name for something that hadn't finished changing. The first night, she didn't unpack. She unrolled her bedroll in the front room, lit a lamp, and watched the dust move like ghosts through the light. The wind found its way in through every crack and seam. It didn't howl, it talked. Quietly, endlessly. She let it. Some kinds of loneliness needed company. At dawn, she woke to silence, so thick it felt like a held breath. Silver stamped once outside, uneasy. Charlotte stepped onto the porch, coffee tin in hand, and saw her breath miss the air even though it wasn't cold. Across the yard, the barn door hung half open, swinging faintly, though no wind moved. A shape stirred inside. Heavy, deliberate. She froze. The shape paused, too. There was no sound but the tiny, uncertain rattle of her coffee tin. Then a sound came, not loud, but low and rough, like a cough dragged up from the bottom of the world. Her first thought was cattle, maybe wild. Her second thought, something older. Charlotte set the tin down and walked to the edge of the porch. Her boots sank slightly into the dust. The air between her and the barn felt alive, charged like the moment before lightning touches ground. "Hello," she said. The word went out soft and human and came back smaller. For a long time, nothing moved. Then, from the shadow within, two eyes caught the light. Amber, slow blinking, patient in the way only something fearless could be. The shape shifted, broad shoulders, fur that drank sunlight even in the dark, and the steady rumble of breath that made the world feel smaller. Charlotte's heartbeat turned into a drum. The thing inside the barn wasn't a ghost or a trick of light. It was alive, and it was looking straight at her. Charlotte didn't run. She'd spent too many years learning that fear only made noise for things already listening. Instead, she let the quiet stretch until it felt like another kind of conversation. The creature's breath rolled out of the dark again, thick and steady. She could smell it now, earth, old straw, something wild and warm that didn't belong to any pasture. "Easy," she murmured, her voice a thread she didn't want to snap. "I'm not here to take what's yours." The eyes blinked once, slow as understanding. The shape didn't charge, didn't retreat. It simply was enormous and unbothered, like the land itself had decided to stand up and breathe. Charlotte backed a step, then another, careful not to break the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The bear, a grizzly, full-grown, magnificent and wrong in all the right ways, watched her the way a question watches its answer. She reached the porch and leaned her hand on the doorframe, realizing her palm was slick with sweat. "Guess this is your home," she whispered. "I'll just borrow the edge of it." The bear huffed, a sound neither threat nor welcome, and turned away, its bulk sliding back into the dark. The barn swallowed it whole. Charlotte didn't breathe again until the last rustle of straw settled. Only then did she let out a laugh that cracked halfway between disbelief and awe. "All right," she said to no one. "So that's the trick." The next morning, she set about pretending everything was fine. That was how survival worked, by folding fear into habit. She drew water from the well, patched the roof where it leaked, and swept the porch clean, though the broom left more dust than it gathered. Silver grazed near the cottonwoods, ears twitching toward the barn with every gust. By noon, Charlotte caught herself glancing that way, too. She told herself it was just to check the door. But part of her wanted to see the bear again, proof that the night hadn't been a fever dream spun by exhaustion. So she took a bucket of water and a heel of stale bread and walked halfway across the yard. "Truce," she said softly, setting the bucket down in a patch of shadow between sunlight and safety. "You stay in your half. I'll stay in mine." The wind shifted. The barn door stirred. For a long moment, nothing followed. Then, slow as dusk, the bear appeared again, massive, silent, its fur a map of light and shade. It stood just inside, head tilted slightly, reading her scent the way a story reads its reader. Charlotte didn't move. She didn't need to. The bear stepped forward, stopped at the line where the sun ended, and lowered its muzzle to the bucket. It drank. Each swallow sounded like a secret being kept. When it lifted its head again, water glistening from its chin, Charlotte realized she was smiling. A small, startled smile, like something that had escaped her before permission could catch it. "Suit yourself," she said, turning back toward the porch. Behind her, the bear made a sound, half sigh, half rumble, that might have been approval. That night, she dreamed of wide rivers, black forests, and something large moving beside her in the dark. When she woke, the air was thick with the scent of rain, and she knew without knowing how that the bear was still there, watching, waiting, not as an intruder, but as a witness. By the third day, the ranch had started to breathe again, or maybe it was Charlotte who had. The wind no longer bit so hard, the creek spoke louder, and the air seemed to remember how to carry birdsong. Still, the barn held its silence like a secret, and the bear remained its shadowed tenant. Charlotte worked the land with the patience of someone used to being watched. She mended fences, pried rust from nails, and spoke aloud just enough to keep the world from forgetting her voice. When the hammer slipped and blood rose on her thumb, she found herself saying, "See, I'm only human," and half expected an answer. That afternoon, clouds came in low and gray, the kind that promised rain, but only delivered memory. Charlotte gathered what she could inside, the saddle, her tools, the day's weariness, and stood on the porch as the light drained from the sky. Somewhere in the barn, straw shifted. Not the lazy kind of movement animals make in sleep, but a restless one. Then came a sound, soft, rhythmic, almost tender. Not a growl, but not silence either. It reached her skin before her ears caught up. She lit her lamp, stepped down into the damp air, and crossed the yard. The barn's door moaned open just enough for her to slip inside. The smell hit first. Musk, wet earth, a depth of animal that reminded her how small she was. The bear was there, as she knew it would be, sitting heavy near the far stall. Its head turned toward her, eyes glinting in the lamplight like two coins sunk deep in a well. Charlotte kept her distance, though every nerve wanted to bolt. She raised the lamp higher. That's when she saw it. A patch of matted fur near the bear's shoulder, a wound, dark and puckered like an old betrayal. "Oh, you poor fool," she murmured. The bear huffed, shifting its weight. She could see now the way it favored that leg, careful, deliberate. It had been hurt before she ever arrived. Maybe that was why it hadn't left. Maybe it couldn't. Charlotte lowered the lamp and crouched. "I won't touch you," she said, voice steady but gentle. "But you need help, don't you?" The bear didn't move. It simply watched, eyes unreadable, and in that stillness something passed between them, something older than language. Over the next days, Charlotte left bits of water laced with salt near the barn, and bread softened in milk. Each morning, the bucket would be empty, the food gone, the ground marked by great, careful paw prints. She spoke to the air as she worked. Not stories, just truths. "How's the leg today? Storm's coming, best stay close." "I'm not running," if that's what you're waiting for. By the week's end, the bear had begun to meet her halfway. It would step from the barn's shadow as she crossed the yard, the two of them arriving at the neutral patch between house and barn like two neighbors who hadn't yet learned how to greet each other. One morning, as the sun lifted through the cottonwoods, she caught sight of something small beside the bear, a flicker of movement low to the ground, pale against the fur. At first, she thought it a trick of light. Then it moved again, clumsy and alive. A cub. Her breath caught. Well, that explains a few things. The bear turned its head slightly, and for the first time Charlotte saw softness there, a weariness that didn't belong to predators, but to mothers. The cub stumbled, squeaked, and pressed against its mother's side. The great animal made a low sound, something that might have been comfort. Charlotte stepped back, heart heavy and light all at once. "So that's who you're guarding," she said quietly. After that, everything changed in small ways. The yard no longer felt haunted. The air no longer carried threat. She worked her days as before, but now she was aware of the rhythm that threaded through it all. The rustle from the barn at dawn, the cub's chirp at dusk, the heavy sighs that marked the night as shared rather than lonely. One evening, as she was patching a hole in the porch rail, the bear emerged fully into the open. The cub trotted at her heel, clumsy and bold. They crossed halfway toward the house before stopping. Charlotte froze, hammer midair. The bear looked at her, not through her, not around her, but at her, as if deciding something. It did the strangest thing. It lowered itself onto its haunches, the cub pressed close, and simply stayed there, watching her work. For the first time in her life, Charlotte felt what it meant to be trusted by something wild. Not completely, not safely, but enough. Enough to matter. That night, she sat by the window long after dark, listening to the small sounds that proved she wasn't alone. She thought about how the world teaches people to be afraid of what they don't understand, and how sometimes the only way through fear is to stay close enough to see what's true. The days began to settle into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Morning meant water drawn from the well, the creak of the bucket rope, the soft thud of Silver's hooves in the dust. Noon meant work, hammering fence posts, patching the roof, coaxing the stove into something like cooperation. And evening meant stillness, the moment between day and dark when everything large turned gentle and everything small grew brave. Through it all, the bear and her cub became part of the land's breath. They were never tame, never pets, but they were present, seen and unseen. Charlotte would glimpse their shadows moving through the cottonwoods, or hear the soft splash of water when they came to the creek at night. She started to mark her days by those signs. They meant the world was still keeping her secret. But secrets don't stay quiet for long, not in country where the wind carries gossip farther than truth can walk. It began with riders, distant shapes on the ridge, men from town, curious or maybe worse. Charlotte saw them once at sunset, 3 figures against the bleeding sky, watching the ranch as though measuring it for a coffin. She said nothing, just tightened the wire on the front fence and let her rifle rest closer to the porch. By the third sighting, she knew one of them, Hackett. Broad shoulders, scar at the mouth, and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He'd been in town the day she bought the place. The kind of man who mistook cruelty for strength. That evening, Charlotte sat on the porch, cleaning her rifle, while the bear moved along the edge of the yard like a slow shadow. The cub trotted behind, tripping over its own paws. For the first time, she realized how much the ranch had changed shape around them, how the wild and the human had learned to breathe together. "Hackett's kind doesn't understand balance," she said softly. "He only knows how to tip the scale." The bear paused, head lifting slightly. The sound that came from her wasn't quite a growl, more like acknowledgement. The air between them thickened with something that wasn't fear. The next morning brought proof. Briggs, the old storekeeper, rode in with his hat clutched to his chest. "Charlotte," he said, voice rough with dust and worry. "There's talk in town. Hackett says you've got a grizzly nesting out here. Says it's dangerous. Says if the law won't deal with it, he will." Charlotte wiped her hands on her trousers, looked out toward the barn. "And what do you say, Briggs?" He sighed. "I say a man like Hackett doesn't need truth to load a bullet." She nodded. "Then I'll be ready." When Briggs left, the quiet that followed was too sharp to be peace. Charlotte gathered what she needed: water, nails, sacks for sand. She lined the porch with barrels from the well, soaked the ground near the barn, and stacked her supplies in reach. Not to fight, to endure. That night, the bear came close. Closer than she'd ever dared hope. Charlotte was sitting on the porch steps, coffee cooling in her hands, when she heard the heavy tread behind her. The bear stopped a few paces away. The cub climbed the porch rail, snuffling curiously. Charlotte didn't move. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice carried warmth instead of warning. The bear's eyes caught the lamplight, amber, steady, unafraid. For a long moment, woman and animal shared the quiet. Then from far off a crack split the air. A gunshot. The cub flinched. The bear turned toward the sound, muscles tensing. Charlotte stood fast, heart hammering. Another shot followed, closer this time, and a shout carried on the wind. "Get inside," she said quickly, as if the bear might listen. She backed to the door, rifle in hand. The bear moved toward the barn, the cub scrambling at her heels. Charlotte could feel the tremor in the ground as they passed. Then came the voices, 3, maybe 4, slurred with whiskey and mean intent. "Charlotte Abbott." Hackett's call was a sneer wrapped in mock courtesy. "We come to help you rid yourself of that beast." Charlotte stepped into the yard, the rifle firm against her shoulder. "You're trespassing," she said, voice flat as a blade. Hackett laughed, the sound brittle. "You think you can claim land that don't want you? That bear'll take your horse next, or your head. We're just saving you the trouble." The others shifted uneasily, but Hackett was already raising his gun. The night split again, flash and thunder. The bullet struck the ground near Charlotte's boots. She fired back, high warning. "Next one hits," she said. From the barn came a roar that silenced the world. The kind of sound that came from the bones of the earth, not a throat. The men froze. The bear burst from the dark, a storm of muscle and fury, and the horses reared, screaming. Hackett fired blindly. The bear struck him like wind striking a flame. One moment he was standing, the next he was gone, swallowed by dust and noise. "Enough!" Charlotte shouted, but the night wasn't listening. Fire bloomed suddenly where one of the men's torches had fallen, licking dry grass, spreading faster than panic. Charlotte dropped her rifle, grabbed the nearest water barrel, and ran. The bear turned from Hackett's crumpled form toward the flames. The cub's cries carried through the smoke. "Go!" Charlotte screamed. "Get to the creek." The bear hesitated only a second, then gathered the cub by the scruff and bounded toward the water, vanishing into the haze. Charlotte threw water, beat the flames with soaked burlap, her lungs burning. The world blurred into heat and smoke and the hammering of her own pulse. When dawn came, the yard was blackened, the barn charred but standing. Hackett lay alive but broken, his pride burned worse than his skin. And the bear. She found her near the trough, steam rising from her fur, sides heaving. Charlotte knelt beside her. "You idiot," she whispered through tears. "You saved us again." The bear blinked, slow and weary. The cub pressed against her, trembling. Charlotte touched the creature's massive shoulder and felt the steady, exhausted heartbeat beneath her palm. "Hold on," she said. "We're not done yet." The fire left a scar across the ranch that would never fade, a dark reminder stitched through gold grass. Charlotte rose each morning to the smell of char and iron, and told herself scars were only proof of survival. She rebuilt the fence line where the posts had turned to ash, each hammer strike a heartbeat saying, "I'm still here." The bear healed slowly. Her fur grew back in rough patches, her steps careful, deliberate. The cub, clumsy and restless, followed her like sunlight follows dawn. Charlotte left food near the well, never too close, never too far. Some mornings she'd find the prints, one large, one small, pressed deep in the damp earth beside the bucket. And once, a fish left on the porch, silver and perfect, a gift or a goodbye. When rain finally came, it was gentle, forgiving. The creek swelled, the land softened, and the ranch began to breathe again. Grass returned where fire had taken, and the wind carried the clean scent of new things. Charlotte stood on the porch one evening, watching clouds drift low and heavy, and realized the fear that used to live in her chest had gone quiet. What filled its place wasn't peace exactly, but something sturdier, belonging. By midsummer, the townsfolk had stopped whispering. Even Briggs, with his cautious heart, came riding in one afternoon with a new sign carved by hand. Willow Creek Ranch, Charlotte Abbott, owner. She hung it above the gate with nails she'd cleaned of rust, and when the hammer struck the last one true, she felt the land settle around her, like something long, untethered finally choosing to stay. That night, the moon was bright as a coin. Charlotte walked to the creek, the water whispering at her boots. Across the bank, two shapes waited in the silver dark. The mother bear, whole again, and beside her the cub, taller now, shoulders rounding toward strength. Charlotte raised her hand, not a wave, just acknowledgement. The bear dipped her head once, a gesture neither wild nor tame, but true. The cub hesitated, curious, then turned to follow. When they vanished into the cottonwoods, Charlotte stayed where she was, listening to the night settle back into itself. The stars stitched the sky back together. The wind moved through the grass, soft as breath. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe that staying wasn't surrender. It was courage.